When you give a human being a hammer, everything is a nail. So when psychiatry trains its residents, people like myself, how to use medications, what we end up doing is we medicate everything. Whether it needs to be or not is not the question. That's the lens you see the world through. And therefore, your point about are we over-prescribing psychotropic medications, I think is accurate. There is a genuine risk, and it's happening particularly in the Western world, in the Americas, so US, Mexico for sure, Canada for sure. I do see a trend towards over-prescribing. And I do think that psychedelic therapies are a wonderful opportunity to diminish the number of medications people are on in such a way that their quality of life is not only not diminished, but it's elevated. So how do psychedelics potentially help? So as you alluded to earlier, sometimes you do have to take people off various classic antidepressants in order to use the psychedelic medication. But here I actually have good news for you and for your students. The most recent data that we have does not support necessarily taking people off classic antidepressants in order to use classic antipsychotics. We used to think that if you're on an antidepressant like an SSRI, taking psilocybin with it would somehow decrease its effectiveness. That is not turning out to be true. The only class of medications where that is without a doubt true is actually MDMA. But in others, dear students, please stay tuned to the data. This automatic past belief, you got to come off medications to go on psilocybin or LSD or ketamine, it's probably not going to be the case. But the evidence, David, is emerging that even with psilocybin, that may not be the case, which all of a sudden expands the world of access for our patients. Yeah. Because so many people say, I would love to get benefits from X, Y, and Z, but I simply cannot come off my medications. And it's too dangerous and it's too risky and the problems will be too many. Can I do both? And classically, we've said to them, no, you can't. That's no longer, in most cases, an automatic. So that's wonderful. In Health Canada, like other regulatory agencies, cannot just change its position based on emerging data. What they need is established data. So I'm sympathetic to their position. But I'm also sympathetic to those of us who actually are keeping a close eye on the research as well as practice. It is not always feasible or safe or appropriate to take people off medications. Hence, this is data that your students would do well to keep a close eye on. Now, de-prescribing. I'm always surprised at how many medications I think a patient really needs. But when push comes to shove, when we do decrease it with caution and wisdom, how many times people are able to come off their medications without being disturbed, without being unsettled, and very often benefited from that process. So thank you for reminding your students that I have done a lot of work on de-prescribing. And there are good resources and there are good suggestions that are offered by the field as to how you do it and why with certain medications, the rate at which you drop it and the process with which you drop it, which is you can do the first half of it fairly rapidly, but the bottom half, particularly the bottom quarter of coming off a medication for a variety of reasons, just has to be done slowly. Those are practical words of advice. But beyond that, there's a psychology to the art of de-prescribing. There's also the process of infecting an individual with confidence and reassurance that goes a long ways. And in my work, I have been repeatedly struck that if I take a biopsychosocial approach to even the art of de-prescribing, how often I'm successful. So good. I'm so glad we're talking about an issue that almost never do we talk about. We are always focused on how to do things, not how to wind things down. I have no doubt that in time we will have good studies, better studies looking at the value of microdosing in all kinds of settings, including the one you just mentioned, David, which is helping someone gently de-prescribe of a medication that's either no longer working or causing too much disruption in their lives or creating a whole host of side effects. I must, however, alert your students that so far the majority of microdosing studies have turned out to be quite negative. They have not turned out to be positive, despite the incredible enthusiasm of many microdose users. And some of the best work that's come out of it is from Imperial College, where they've actually conducted double-blinded studies of microdosing. And they simply aren't able to find any difference between microdosing placebo or microdosing an active substance like psilocybin. But then you're left scratching your head. How's that possible? You and I hear hundreds of stories of people microdosing and really talking it up. So I do think sometimes we often call it power of placebo and we write it off to it is the inert pill. But I think it's deeper than that, David. It's the power of intention, which is profoundly strong. It's the power of belief. It's also the power of this desire to do something for yourself that's positive. When you put that together, it is very powerful. So those who are microdosing, I don't wish to necessarily talk you out of it, but do want to offer you caution. If you and I are willing to look at studies coming out of Johns Hopkins or Imperial or NYU and say, look, here's a double-blind study proving that psychedelics cause mystical experiences in large doses. And look, world, here's the evidence that what I've been doing is legitimate. Then you got to live by that same rule when you see negative studies. Wisdom derived from communities is real wisdom. But wisdom derived from really well done studies is also wisdom. And when there's a dichotomy between them, where there's a difference of opinion between them, it's okay to say it's unsettled. It is not settled science yet. Let's wait for more data to come out. I also want to caution people, there might be dangers in microdosing that we had not previously fully anticipated. And the dangers might be, in particular, damage to heart valves. And I suspect a lot of strong proponents of microdosing would say, I'm over worrying, but I want you to know, folks, this reminds me a lot about many other medications, not just substances, but medications where a excessively cavalier attitude ended up really harming populations. So I guess in final word of advice would be microdosing, wonderfully interesting concept, not proven yet, and I do have some concerns.